Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Insights Interview, where we explore the evolving landscape of finance and technology. I'm Jack Robertson, data journalist at the Payments Association, and today we're looking at how the UK payments landscape is being reshaped in real time. Real-time payments are accelerating worldwide, open banking adoption is hitting record highs, and the UK is embarking on a once-in-a-generation modernisation of its payments infrastructure. From digital currencies and regulatory reform to the convergence of new payment forms, the next decade could fundamentally reshape how money moves. Today, we're exploring where the biggest opportunities lie and what the future of payments could look like. Joining me is Jeremy McDougall, Strategic Solution Consulting Director at ACI Worldwide, and Somya Patnaik, Global Solutions Leader for Account-to-Account Payments at ACI Worldwide, both bringing expertise in real-time payments, digital innovation, and the global payments ecosystem. Jeremy, Somya, great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having us here, Jack.
Pleasure to be here.
Great stuff. So if we look across payments in 2026, it feels like the industry is being reshaped in real time, arguably, from the rise of instant payments to shifting customer expectations and obviously a noticeable uptick in fraud. So Somya, perhaps if you kick us off, what are the key themes that you find are most defining payments right now?
Thanks, Jack. If I look across the payment landscape in 2026, what really stands out is several different themes, but how all of them are interconnected and reinforcing one another. First is, of course, real-time payments becoming the norm and continuing to grow like never before. What started off as a differentiator many years ago is now become a table stake for banks and financial institutions. So consumers, businesses, corporates are all assuming that money should move faster with certainty and transparency, and it has become a default expectation. If you look globally, over 85 countries now have their real-time payment systems, and in some markets, it has even overtaken existing payment trails like cards and ACH in terms of transaction volume. And this momentum is growing even in the cross-border space. So the second theme for me is cross-border instant payments, because once you've achieved that domestic success, the obvious next step is how can we replicate that speed cross-border? And cross-border payments have been costly. It has been complex. Cross-border real-time payments are now becoming a market-led initiative for most countries, which is also being shaped by policy such as the G20 roadmap, which is putting a global focus on addressing the current challenges around cross-border payments. Another defining theme that I think we see quite often is payment consolidation. Gone are the days where payments were neatly segmented and worked in silos. The industry now wants to break that silos. They want to unify payment systems and do that intelligently and securely. We can't forget about fraud, because as the transaction volumes are increasing, fraud is becoming an industry challenge. So in 2026, I see the industry leaning harder on intelligence, collective intelligence to be precise, insights, controls to identify and reduce frauds. And finally, but most importantly, consumer expectations have dramatically changed over the years. They don't think on the lines of what payment type, what payment applications. The default expectation is that payment needs to be faster, secure, always available. And all these expectations are then flowing upstream to banks and financial institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy, any other themes you'd like to add?
So the UK is going through a large infrastructure modernisation. A few years ago, we had the National Payments Vision that set out what that vision should be for retail payments in the UK. That replaced the long new payments architecture referred to as the NPA. And this year, 2026, for the UK is really about executing on that. HMT, along with the other regulators, released the Payments Forward Plan, and that lays clear steps for what should happen next for retail payments, the upgrade of faster payments and BACs. So that's the first thing I'd like to add in. Looking at the emergence of digital currencies. So they're here. They are live, looking at central bank digital currencies, referred to as CBDCs. That is the retail version of it. Those are live in many countries and being explored through the digital pound in the UK, but also the euro have confirmed, in the Eurozone, they've confirmed they'll go ahead with it. put that together along with tokenized bank deposits and stable coins. There's a lot going on, which I'm sure we'll unpack during this episode. And then the final thing is, it wouldn't be a payments podcast without mentioning AI. AI is everywhere. And as you can imagine, it touches on the payments journey as well. And we are seeing that both within the payments processing leg, but also now looking at the end-to-end journey for consumers, whether it's agentic AI and looking to utilize AI on that front. So bringing all of those themes together, it's going to be a busy 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. So real-time payments once felt like a bit of a regional success story, right? Both with India and Brazil sort of setting the pace, but now adoption elsewhere is accelerating fast as well, as you mentioned. So from your vantage point, do you think this really marks the point where real-time has gone mainstream?
Absolutely. If you look at the journey of real-time payments globally, for the longest time, it has been a set of regional success stories. We talk about India, we talk about Brazil, but I think in 2026, we can firmly say that it has moved into mainstream. Some markets have definitely achieved phenomenal success, but I see other markets like Latin America and Africa that has huge untapped potential. India is definitely a clear leader. They do more than 50% of the global real-time payment volumes today. Similarly, PIX in Brazil had a similar trajectory, and both these markets have really raised the bar of what consumers expect everywhere else. And it's not just about the transaction speed, but the breadth of use cases and the customer experience that sits on top of the real-time rails. What drives this adoption is interesting because it's not a single factor but a combination of factors. In some markets, they have mandated the use of instant payments like PIX in Brazil or the recent instant payment regulations in Europe. But what we have seen is deeper collaboration amongst the ecosystem players like regulators, infrastructure providers, banks, fintechs to scale real-time payment systems, to make it more open, to make it more inclusive, and come up with a diverse set of use cases. And then there's a growing focus worldwide around payment sovereignty, and governments and central banks are thinking that these domestic real-time payments systems are strategic, the ones that can support competitiveness and economic growth. So I think it's much more than just moving money faster. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And other than just moving money faster, as you mentioned, how far along are we in extending that speed and certainty across borders, right? Is cross-border the next frontier for real time, or do you think it's still some way off?
Where it gets really interesting is when we try to take that speed and certainty cross borders, because cross border payments today lag that domestic real time experience. But that gap is narrowing with the rise of cross border instant payments. If we look at the global picture, there is increased focus on interlinking the domestic real time payment schemes today. Over the past few years, there have been ambitious steps in setting up bilateral, multilateral arrangements between countries to support cross-border instant payments. Asia is clearly ahead of the pack. We have seen successful bilateral connections live today. They're also part of multilateral model like the ASEAN Regional Payment Connectivity Network, which brings together 13 countries in the ASEAN region. Other such initiatives are BUNA, which connects 22 countries in Middle East Africa. And then there are broader, more strategic initiatives like the Bank of International Settlements Project Nexus, which has a larger ambition of standardizing and scaling cross-border real-time payments. Even when we look at use cases, they're expanding from domestic to cross-border, whether it's trade, tourism, remittances. Cross-border remittance is a key use case where speed and certainty really matters. And we're also seeing B2B use cases where, the real-time settlement materially changes how cash is managed. So the opportunities are infinite.
Yeah. So arguably on that point of real-time settlement, we've now reached a point where digital forms of money are no longer theoretical, whether that's tokenized bank deposits, CBDCs, or stable coins. They're actively being explored and piloted, right? So Jeremy, how do you see these digital currencies fitting into the financial system today? Are they catalysts for accelerating transformation, or do you think more complementary layers to sit alongside existing rails?
So digital currencies, they're here. and they're here to stay. They're already live. And the key difference is that they are a digital form of the money we're used to now. But to answer the question, they're definitely complementary and will have to work alongside as opposed to replacing it. And a question Somya and I get asked quite a lot is more of the either or and which one will be the winner. But we're pretty clear they're both gonna be here and they're gonna have to work together. The reasons for that is the likes of cash, checks are still widely used. Yes, they're declining. However, due to a number of reasons, and I agree with them, those forms of money should be accessible for all and give extra choice. Digital currencies do have some advantages, and that is underpinned by the technology. So it's distributed ledger technology, referred to as DLT. The most common one is a blockchain, and that provides functionality like programmability, a thing called atomic settlement that is near instant. And with that, the benefits that you get for, say, tokenized bank deposits, they can be more efficient for the banks, and therefore they can pass on those savings to their corporates and consumers. Looking at stable coins, for example, in thinly traded currencies. So looking at in Africa, for example, a lot of those countries and corporates and businesses within those countries struggle to get access to cross-border efficient payments. We know today, whilst there are other initiatives to improve it, it's still cross-border payments, especially with that final leg, can lag getting to the beneficiary. So stable coins do offer that solution, but the most important thing here is that they have to work together. And when we look at procuring a stable coin, the most common way is to exchange your fiat and find a way through a solution that can get you a stable coin. And at some point, certainly where we are now, people will look to return that. And that is referred to as on-ramping and off-ramping. And I think those who have those solutions and allow consumer and corporates to on-ramp and off-ramp and use whichever form they want seamlessly will be the winners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to sort of follow on from that question, from ACI's perspective, how are you actually seeing clients and partners engage with digital currencies in practice? Do you think we're closer to real-time integration than the headlines suggest?
Yes, so there's many industry initiatives taking place. We're seeing the private sector coming together with a group of financial institutions. We're seeing the likes of SWIFT have launched the digital ledger program, which brings a large number of their members and large banks together to explore cross-border payments using tokenized deposits. There's Project Agora, which is also doing a similar thing, looking at tokenized bank deposits, starting with the cross-border use case. And they are bringing, the difference with that is that they're bringing both the private sector, so financial institutions, but also the central banks who are really key to this. The central banks working together with the private sector is really key to it. So there's a lot of, to answer the question, it's happening, but collaboration is key for it to be successful because not one party can succeed on their own. And that's why whether it becomes to common standards, bringing people around, there's liquidity considerations, there's settlement, and having people around the table talk about that has been quite refreshing. And at the same time, a lot of private institutions have these forms of money, like tokenized bank deposits have been live for a while. Stable coins, a lot in the US, have also been live. But we've got to remember there's still the current forms of money being used, and those will continue for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned in your introduction that the UK is in, dramatic regulatory change, arguably. With the National Payments Vision, the Payment Forward Plan, there's a lot in motion. So what do you see as the single most material next step for the UK that it needs to take?
So the UK has now established the governance around retail payments and the future of it. So there's the Retail Payments Infrastructure Board, referred to the RPIB. That now is the board that will set the guardrails for what that future of retail payments will look like. They've stood up the Design Authority, which is currently going through at speed, looking at the requirements and what that should look like and setting the design that will go. And probably for the first time, that I can remember, there's accountability. And what I mean by that is within those forums, the Bank of England will now, if there isn't consensus, they'll be able to make that decision and move forward. And what we found in the past is that you get to that 70% agreement, but it's really the ones that are not comfortable that stop the whole thing going forward. So I think having the right governance in place is the single most important thing. And again, looking at 2026, hopefully that will be the year where decisions are made and we can execute and not just produce reports.
So where do you think the real term impact lands, or where do you think it's going to land first? Will it be on customers? Will it be on banks or the merchants?
I'd say in order. Initially, it's going to be the banks, because the banks are the ones who provide the infrastructure, both the central bank and the commercial banks. So they're going to have architectural changes. They're going to have to upgrade their systems. They're going to have to make sure that they're interoperable. They allow different forms of money like open banking and it being interoperable with that. So initially, the impact will be seen by the banks and sort of private institutions, but also the opportunities. Looking further down, so for consumers, Somya has already referred to fraud in the opening. So if the infrastructure becomes more resilient and there's improved fraud detection, then that should benefit consumers. Arguably, from a consumer's point of view, retail payments are a pretty high standard right now, and they're almost invisible, and the changes that take place. But I do believe there'll be more choice and protections coming in, and that will be the main change. And for merchants, they always feel like they're last in the chain, but one of the key elements of the national payments vision is to provide more competition. And with that, hopefully there should be a reduction in fees and the costs that the merchants tend to bear, being one of the last in the chain. So hopefully for merchants, this will be a positive that will allow more choice, innovation, and therefore a reduction in fees.
So Somya, if we're to come to you, obviously ACI operates across many markets globally. In your perspective, how does the UK regulatory direction compare? And do you think there are lessons from elsewhere that UK policymakers should be paying more attention to?
Absolutely. I think Jeremy articulated it really well. If we look at the global picture, the UK is definitely heading in the right direction. We are moving towards a multi-money future. There is focus on competitiveness, consumer protection. There's emphasis on interoperability, digital identity, fraud prevention, all the right things. So the intent and direction are right, but there's always learnings from other markets, right, to understand what's landed well, what did not. If you look at some markets, regulators have mandated the use of specific payment rails, which had led to rapid and in some cases almost overnight adoption. Whereas in other markets, including the UK, have followed a more market-led approach where adoption was organic. And both models seem to have worked. But what really stands out is how important ecosystem alignment is, because successful digital payment markets have shown that are markets where ecosystem players are all pulling in the same direction. And when you have that sort of alignment and a shared objective to scale up payment systems, your speed to market is incredibly faster and the outcomes are more sustainable in the long run. Regulations are also supporting open and diverse ecosystems, lowering the barriers to entry for fintechs, big techs to come in and accelerate innovation. We can't forget about use cases, because it's not about infrastructure, but the solving for the real life customer pain points. Regulations are making a difference, and it is reducing fragmentation in some markets. It is incentivizing the ecosystem players so that they could scale payment systems efficiently and sustainably.
Yeah. So in the UK, right, open banking has now crossed into the mainstream. I think Open Banking Limited quoted that there are over 16.5 million active user connections, representing nearly 1 in 3 UK adults. So, do you think payments have become the most compelling use case for open banking as a whole?
Open banking is stronger in the UK like never before, and we have seen real progress across both data and payments. And this is now heading towards a more payment-centered, ecosystem. You said 16.5 million people have used open banking today, and one of the key drivers here is how consumers are becoming more digital. They are in the lookout for tailor-made payment experiences. They need better insights. They need easier access to financial data. For the longest time, it has been very data-led, so the focus was on data use cases. But now we are seeing the next wave of open banking, which is centered around payments, which is centered around practical use cases which people interact with on a daily basis. And then variable recurring payments, for instance, is emerging as a powerful use case in payments. Open banking payments are consent-based, where I as a consumer, I give a consent to who can take a payment from my account, when they can take it, how much they can take it, and I can revoke that consent anytime I would like. And VRPs are now modernizing recurring payments. They're giving more flexibility and choice to consumers. So yeah, we are heading towards a more payment-led open banking ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we were to put our future gazing hats on for a second, and if I can ask you both to look a decade into the future, and I mean, this next question could arguably be a podcast in itself, but how do you see AI shaping the future of payments? Jeremy, maybe if you kick us off.
Anywhere where there is manual intervention with humans, AI can replace that. The payments journey, and Somya referred earlier, especially when you go cross-border, there's exceptions, investigations, problems with reconciliation. So if I look to the future, I see a world where AI supports us humans with any manual process, and based on risk tolerance, that will be tweaked to say that there's a recommendation, but I still want to review it, or once you're comfortable, you let those through, and then it creates capacity. We can create creative thinking. We can look at utilizing our brains more rather than being in the processes. And then look into the future, agentic AI, which is quite topical. If I look at the wider purchasing journey, that a payment is part of it, using agentic AI, either e-commerce or in store, really you could set parameters. And I know this is a use case being investigated now in terms of do you set your agentic AI parameters for purchasing an item, and within that you would set the color, whether it's a form of clothing, and then within that you can go further to say, when it comes to the payment, please give me the most efficient form of payment. And then rather than us decide now whether I use my debit or credit card or an open banking payment, you just delegate that authority to AI. And that's probably more than 10 years. That's within the next 10 years. But I see a world where if once we get comfortable with it, a lot of the choices that we have to make now and think will just automatically be made for us.
And Somya, from your perspective, where would you say ACI Worldwide sits in building some of those seamless sort of technology platforms of the future?
Yeah, if I look at the future of payments, two things are shaping everything we see, AI and payment consolidation. On one side, we are seeing multiple payment trails coexist, and on the other side, consumer expectation is that payment needs to be instant, invisible, and always available. So that is driving the shift away from fragmented systems to more consolidated systems that will orchestrate multiple payment trails, and they'll do that intelligently and securely. That's exactly where ACI Kinetic comes in. ACI Kinetic is designed as a modern cloud-native payment platform that will bring together account-to-account payments, card payments into a single platform with built-in payment intelligence and embedded AI to orchestrate and optimize payment flows as the complexity rises. And Jeremy spoke about some of the payment use cases, AI use cases in payments. And at ACI, we try to support use cases that are transparent and also includes human-in-the-loop oversight, which is absolutely critical. If you take payment repair, for instance, every repair would require an operator review or an operator oversight before execution. So this ensures accountability, auditability, and risk control, which is absolutely critical in a highly regulated payment environment. So achieving that balance is important because I believe in payments, full automation without control isn't innovation, it's risk. So we should be using AI, to accelerate decision making and not completely remove human responsibility. So going forward, so this industry is going to present a lot of opportunities, and technology providers like ourselves need to consolidate intelligently. We need to support multiple payment rails, including the emerging ones. We need to embed AI, but in a transparent way, and most importantly, we need to build platforms for trust, where human oversight, compliance, and resilience are all built into the core.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground today, right? From real-time payments to the future of money itself. But if we're to sort of bring this to a close, what's the single most important message you think you should leave listeners with? Somya, perhaps you start.
I think we're not heading towards a world where one form of money replaces all others. They're all here to stay, serving different needs. What really matters is how they're coming together, and we are moving towards an interoperable payment ecosystem. And for consumers and businesses, this means greater control, choice, and trust, where payments will fade in the background and everything will work better together.
And Jeremy, your final thoughts?
Yeah, as we've unpacked during this episode, there's so much change taking place in the world of payments right now, and it's impossible for one party or organization to do it themselves. Public and private collaboration is paramount in order for payments and to be successful.
Yeah, a really fascinating discussion. Thank you both for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
What's clear is that the next decade won't just be about faster payments or new rails, it's about a fundamental convergence. Real-time payments, open banking, digital currencies, and AI-driven experiences all reshaping how money moves and how customers interact with it. For those building the infrastructure or operating within it, the message is clear. The pace of change is accelerating and the opportunity is significant. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Insights Interview. If you'd like to learn more about ACI Worldwide's work, do visit their website for further resources.